A warm welcome to you all to the introduction of Spring Framework. Myself Nagashri, I am your Spring trainer with around 8.5 years of experience in core Java, middleware, tools, as well as Springs. So, now without wasting much time, let us get into the process of learning Spring Framework. So, the agenda for today. Today, I have thought to mainly introduce us to the Spring Framework. In the introduction, we are just getting started of the Spring Framework. That is, why exactly we need Spring Framework, what is Spring, features of Spring Framework, architecture, or we can say the modules of Spring Framework, and a first look on the first Spring application, or you can say it as a hello world. So, first let us see why we need Spring Framework. So, for this, I'm quoting two reasons why we need Spring Framework. The first reason is let us consider a real life scenario wherein we are having a company named A to Z Technology Private Limited, which has given which has a requirement from a client saying it needs an application within 15-20 days, or you can say some definite time frame, and they need to complete the project as early as possible. So if we follow the traditional JEE application or traditional Java web applications, what happens is it takes a lot of time to plan, implement, test everything. So, but if we use the Spring framework, it is fast and efficient, as well as it can make the project up and running within a definite time frame. So, Spring is said to be very efficient in that respect. The second thing is when we go back to the history, that is usage of Java beans. So, what happened during the usage of Java beans is though it had reusable software components and it was pretty accurate, the transaction management and security part it failed, or what we can say is it lagged. So later on when they introduced the EJB, in the EJB even it had pretty much advantages, there was some difficulty found in the home and remote interfaces as well as the lifecycle callback methods implementation. So during that scenario in 2003, the Spring emerged as a solution to all the complications that were being faced in the history. So, especially the complexity part of Java Beans and EJBs was completely resolved by using the Spring framework, mainly because of the important techniques that are used in the Spring, like the aspect oriented programming, plain old Java objects or POJOs, and dependency injection. These are all the not only the techniques but are also powerful concepts that have been become the top features of Spring framework. So in 2003, Rod Johnson was the person who developed the Spring framework. So now let's understand what is Spring. Spring is an open source, lightweight application development framework that allows Java developers to build simple, reliable, and scalable enterprise applications. Mainly, this framework focuses on business logic. That is, if we consider struts to focus on the other part, that is the web tier or the presentation tier, here in the Spring, it mainly focuses on the business objects or the business logic. So, that is one of the important advantages. What is Spring? Spring provides a solution to the problem of implementation of middle tier of an application and also ensures that the new framework integrates well with the Struts framework. As we all know, Struts framework mainly focuses on the web tier, and the business logic or the business part is completely taken care by the Spring. So it is mainly what this process is called as the coherent architecture. That is, it provides a solution for MVC framework, AOP part, JDBC part, EJB integration framework, and also for Hibernate tool part. So now let's come into the understanding of features of Spring. So the first thing is the IOC container, that is inversion of control container, also known as core container, where it basically consists of the assembler code which can handle the configuration management of application objects. So mainly there are two packages, that is org.springframework.beans and org.springframework.context package. So mainly these two, the Spring framework basically provides these two packages. They help the they do the provision of the functionality of the IOC container in the application. So about this feature we will discuss later in the later part of the Spring demo. Next is the MVC framework. As we all know, MVC stands for Model View Controller Architecture, wherein all the requests first go through the controller and they are dispatched to the different views of the output. So when a request arrives, so it is first received by the dispatcher servlet, then this dispatcher servlet communicates with the handler mapping and calls the controller associated with the request. Later on, appropriate model or view object is returned back to the dispatcher servlet. So that is the overall functionality. Then one of the most basic thing, that is the lightweight. What exactly is lightweight is, when we consider the servlets or JSPs, we have the problem of starting and stopping the server. That is, for example, if we are using Tomcat server, we need to start it whenever we change any part of the application. We need to stop and restart the server. So sometimes even we may have to delete the server, add the server as well. So in case of Spring, all these things are not needed because we mainly change in the configuration file, XML file, so the bean name, etc., and that causes transparency as well as accuracy in the implementation. Next, the transaction management. If we consider the banking applications, we mainly use these Spring because they help in different transaction management scenarios. Next, the JDBC exception handling part. So mainly most of the Java application needs the handling of errors easily and efficiently. So implementation of this abstraction layer is very important so that we can reduce the JDBC programming code in the JDBC in the web application, and in order to reduce the exceptions like driver not found exception and SQL exception, this Spring is effectively, it is used in handling all those exceptions. And now let's come to the modules of Spring. So, or the architecture of the Spring. As we can see in the diagram, Spring is basically having these modules, that is Spring Core, Spring AOP, Spring ORM, Spring Webflow, Spring DAO, Spring Context, and Spring MVC. So one by one we can go through it. First is the Spring Core. Spring Core module is the core component of the Spring framework. So here there are two types of implementations, that is Bean Factory and Application Context. If we consider the Spring Core, It is the core component of the Spring framework. So there are two types of implementations, that is Bean Factory and application context. Bean Factory is defined by using org.springframework.beans.factory.beanfactory and application context. Application context is basically it it is a module that inherits all its features from beans package, and it is basically used to implement the functionalities like internationalization, validation, event propagation, and resource loading. Now let's go to AOP module. AOP module is nothing but we can compare this AOP to object oriented programming module. Like how in object oriented programming or the OOPs, each and every programming concept is decomposing the applications into objects. In the similar way, we are decomposing the the aspects or the concerns. There, how in OOPs we are having objects, here we are having aspects or the concerns. So what exactly are these? These aspects, they are very much useful in transaction management, logging, and failure detection and monitoring. So we are using an annotation called at aspect, at the rate of aspect. So they are regular spring beans or classes used with at aspect annotation. And in the bank account transfer, the amount transfer, etc., from one account to another, we are basically using these aspects. So that is one of the important implementation of this aspects in real life scenarios. Then comes the ORM. ORM, as we all know, it is associated with the Hibernate technology, where this ORM module is used to access the databases with the help of a DAO, data access objects, and mainly these APIs are used with respect to Hibernate and IBATIS frameworks. Again, it is used for the transaction management, exceptional handling, and resource management. Then comes the web MVC. As I already told, the request, when once the request comes, the dispatcher servlet will handle all the requests, and the dispatcher servlet in turn communicates with the handler mapping and the controller, and appropriate service methods, and the requests are returned to the dispatcher servlet again. So there comes the entire flow of the web MVC. Next is Spring Web Flow. In Spring Web Flow, it is nothing but the extension of the Spring Web MVC module, which we just now talked about, and it is used to define an XML file or the Java class that manages the workflow between the different pages of the web application, like how the flow happens. As we already discussed about in the MVC architecture, how the dispatcher servlet and the controller communicate with each other. In the similar way, how the workflow between the different pages of the web application is handled is with the help of Spring Web Flow. Then comes the application context. As we already talked about, application context mainly inherits all its features from beans package, org.springframework.beans package, and it mainly supports the functionalities like internationalization, validation, event propagation, as well as message functionality, that is message flow handling operations. Next, let's have a look on the my first Spring application. This is just to have a hold on the how to get started with the Spring. That is, first we need to install Java and Eclipse, and within the Eclipse there is a if we go to the help, there is a Eclipse market space. There, if we search for the release of the Spring, that is 3.8.4 release, there we can start installing the Spring. I can show all these. First look on my first Spring application. Here To work on Springs, we first need installation of Java, that is JDK, as well as Eclipse. And within the Eclipse itself, we can take the latest version of Eclipse, where if we search for the Eclipse market space and search for the Spring IDE 3.8.4, then we can start working on it. The IDE opens and we can start working on it. So I'll show all these examples in my next demo in thoroughly. But right now, since this is getting started with the Spring, I've just given an overall view of how it appears. So how to get in touch with it. So the first thing is, let's create an employee bean.java. What happens is, first, as we all know, in Java application we need to give the package name. Here let's imagine our package name is org.visualsoft.myfirstspring, and in the within the Java project itself we can create all these beans. So let's take a class, public class employee bean, private string name. So here what we are doing is, just like bean, Java beans, we are using getters and setters here, where setter is setting this dot name is equal to name, and here get name is printing the my message whatever I want to print, I am printing here. So next is creation of XML file or config file. Here the configuration file or the XML file is very important as part of the Spring framework, because we are doing most of the things, references, everything in this XML file itself. So first we'll have the XML version and the namespaces, below which we are having the bean ID, which is very important, that is employee bean, the name of the employee bean that we are accessing, and the path of that employee bean, the class path of the employee bean that we have used here. So from which it will fetch the actual variable. Here the property name is also equally important, because the value whatever we are providing here is getting printed here. So the value, because the property name is equal to name, value is equal to hello, that is what is getting printed in the name here. So that is equally important. And creating the main, as we all know, each and every application will have a single main function. So the main function basically has to import the application context as well as the API class path XML application context from where we are exactly fetching the XML. And here my class is my first employee demo, and here I am getting the bean name. Here we are basically getting the employee bean here, the name, and object dot get name. So here class path XML application context is the API which fetches the particular XML. So now let's see the result. The result will be my message is hello. Here my message is what is printed here. This hello is taken from this bean value, property value, that is hello. Okay.